That's probably a good moment for it. I've been doing more work on procedural level generation this week. I talked a little bit in Monday's blog about sort of designing the internal layout of every room or scrolling region. I'm sort of using those terms interchangeably, room and scrolling region, to just mean a sort of discrete space that you can walk around that will scroll to another section once you reach the edge. But that's sort of only half the problem of level generation. The other side is figuring out what the structure of a level as a whole is going to look like. And I've been trying to keep those two sides of the problem separate. You know, when I'm designing the level as a whole, I shouldn't have to think about what the inside of any one room is going to look like. And when I'm designing the inside of one room, I shouldn't have to care what the rest of the level looks like. There are necessarily places where those overlap a little bit, but I'm trying to keep them as separate as possible. Where they do overlap is like, you know, there needs to be connections between rooms. So I need to know that, like, okay, there's, you know, a door between these rooms, either like on the top or bottom of the room. And then probably at some point I'm going to start thinking about sort of what the intent or purpose of each room is. So I can say, like, okay, this room is a combat area, this room is a shop, this is a boss room, those sorts of things. And sort of place those in the level as I see fit, and then that sort of intent will probably also inform how I generate the room itself. So maybe if I'm building a shop, maybe I'd start with a different set of prefabs that are like the shop prefabs, so then that room sort of makes sense in that context. But yeah, so I've been thinking a little bit about how I want to structure the level as a whole from a sort of a high level view. And I think where I've started is like, okay, figure out first, like, what should the square footage of every level be? In Gunmetal Arcadia 0, I had some, you know, general idea of, okay, I want it to be this many screens. So regardless of, like, if a room could scroll by some certain amount, I was thinking of, like, breaking it down into, okay, here's a screen, and then we'll scroll over, and here's another screen, because that's sort of how my editor works. I sort of build things in those sort of quantized cells. So I had some target there. It was like, I think 30 or 40 screens for every level. But now I'm thinking in terms of, okay, I want this to be sort of a little bit more of like a dungeon crawly space, a little bit more open-ended, more room to play around and explore. So probably the levels will be a little bit bigger than that. But I need to start thinking about, like, how do they branch? You know, in Gunmetal Arcadia 0, there were no branches, by and large. There were one or two exceptions. They tended to be linear, and this time around, you know, I want to, you know, have that sort of thing where it's like, okay, go down this arm, find a key down here, backtrack a little bit. Maybe I saw where I could use a key earlier, but I didn't have one yet, and go down that arm, and that sort of thing. So I'm trying to figure out how that's going to work. What I've started with this week is I've defined every level as every level starts by defining like a pillar that's sort of the hub, a room that scrolls vertically, and from there it branches off in a number of arms. And that was sort of inspired by looking at dungeons, or looking at maps of dungeons in Zelda 2, and sort of seeing if I could generalize the way their dungeons worked. And they tended to be a little bit different in every case, so there wasn't really one sort of general pattern I could find. But, you know, you did see that sort of thing where it'd be like very long horizontal stretches, and then you find an elevator and, you know, travel up and down a little bit, and there would be a few different ways you could go from there. It wouldn't just be, okay, elevator down and then continue going the one way you can go. The elevators tended to be branch points. So there would be a few different places you go, and you would generally have to, you know, go down one path and find a key or find an item, and then backtrack and go try another way. So I'm probably going to be playing around with that sort of thing a little bit. I've also been thinking maybe I can find maybe I can find a language where I can describe these rules in the editor, and then every level can sort of have different variants. You know, maybe the final level in the game will be much more branchy, you know, maybe there will be more opportunities for that sort of backtracking, whereas earlier in the game, maybe it'll be a little more linear, you know, the branches will be a little shallower, so maybe it's just like, okay, a one-room branch that's just a shop, as opposed to like a whole arm that leads to a shop eventually, but it takes a while to get there, and then you have to do more backtracking, that sort of thing. So a lot of these ideas are still in my head. I haven't really started implementing much. Like I said, right now I have this thing where it's sort of a vertical pillar with arms branching off to the sides, but it doesn't have any goals yet. There's still no enemies in there. I have been getting entities fixed up, so I can place entities in the little quarter scale prefabs of every room, and it will position those correctly when it composites those into a complete scrolling region. But yeah, a lot of it's still sort of up in the air. I'm just sort of trying to feel out what's going to make the most sense. I think probably pretty soon I'm going to have to start making some improvements to my editor. Early on in Gunmetal Arcadia, I added some tools for things like the entity animation tool, which was something that I'd sort of really missed when I was working on Super Win the Game. I was like, okay, I need a better way to author animations for my characters within the editor. So I ended up doing some tools work on that, and it feels like pretty soon I'm going to need to start doing some similar sorts of tools for defining level generation. I think some of that will be defining the theme of a level in terms of what tiles get placed in different areas, so that when I draw the prefabs, I can just draw them as gray boxes, and I don't have to care about making sure edges of bricks line up nicely and those sorts of things. Or if I'm doing like an outdoors level, make sure that there's a layer of grass on top of the ground, that sort of thing. I want to be able to just sort of design a theme, and it can sort of automatically, procedurally place all those tiles exactly as they would be if I were sort of going through the level by hand and just picking out interesting ways to decorate levels. So hopefully I'll have a chance to start working on that soon. I think that's probably going to be a really interesting problem to try to solve, to figure out how to generalize some of the ways that I just randomly place things by hand when I'm hand designing a level, and try to build rules around that so the game can sort of automatically generate similar things. So that should be fun. But yeah, I mean it's getting there. I still feel like things are happening very slowly, and I think part of that is that I'm still very much like, I guess it's been like 2 or 3 weeks, I guess, since I launched Gunmetal Arcadia 0, and I still feel like I'm just sort of like cooling down from that crunch, and not yet really into like feeling like I've completely hit the ground running on the roguelike Gunmetal Arcadia yet. But I'm trying to get something happening, so at least I have a base to build on, moving forward. So we'll see how that goes. I forgot to write about it in Monday's blog, but I ran into a bug last week that I was sort of panicking about for an hour or two before I realized it was a very silly mistake. The bug was showing up as like, I was trying to index into a map container, and the game would crash because it was like trying to traverse down a part of the binary tree that didn't exist. And I was like, I've been using this map container class for a few years. I'm pretty sure it works correctly, but I was trying to reproduce this bug, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. It was like memory was getting corrupted somewhere, but I couldn't figure it out. I tried coming up with like a minimal test case to reproduce it, and that wasn't working. I couldn't reproduce exactly the same thing I was seeing. Eventually, it turned out to be a problem where the map container, the type that it was mapping to was actually a vector container. So I had sort of like dynamic arrays inside a map, and and then each element of these vector containers also had a fixed size array of like tile data inside those. And I was accidentally indexing into that fixed size array inside the vector, inside the map, with a negative number. And I was stomping over memory, ultimately in the map object when I was doing that. But it took me so long to realize that, because I had just sort of like went right into debugging the crash in the map object where like it's traversing the wrong side of the binary tree, and I wasn't looking at like the input that I was giving it there, where it's like, oh hey, I'm indexing into an array with a negative number. That's probably my problem. So yeah, that was just kind of a lesson in like, you know, before you get too deep into like the low level engine stuff, maybe make sure that you're actually feeding it like data that makes sense. As always, if you're enjoying this series, please like and subscribe. And this series is supported through Patreon. I want to give a shout out to Patreon supporters Jace, Benjamin Anderson, and Opine Nana for their contributions. You can find the links to my Patreon campaign below. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.